You ever wonder how a giant utility company can look 5 years into the future and predict its earnings with, well, incredible accuracy? We're about to dive into a massive financial forecast that's not just about the money. It actually tells a story about a huge shift in how we're all going to be using power. So let's jump right in. All right, here's the number that just jumps off the page: 12,297 crore rupees. Now, for those of us who don't think in crores every day, a crore is 10 million. So we're talking about a revenue projection of, get this, over 1.6 billion US dollars. The real question is, how in the world do they get to a number that specific for the year 2030? And that is the exact puzzle we're going to solve today. This isn't just a wild guess. It's a really carefully built forecast. And it all comes down to their data. And, as we'll see, a few really important assumptions. So let's dig in and see how the whole thing works. Okay, Section 1, a billion-dollar forecast. So let's start with the big picture, right? How do you even start mapping out that kind of massive growth? The secret sauce, the engine behind this whole thing, is this one number: a 6.16% compound annual growth rate. You'll hear this called CAGR. Now, this isn't just adding a little bit each year. It's growth that builds on last year's growth. The snowball analogy is perfect. It just gets bigger, faster, every single year. And you can really see that snowball effect right here in the numbers. Look at that. It's not one giant leap. It's a steady, predictable climb. From 2026 to 2028, revenue goes up by about 1,300 crore. Then, from 2028 to 2030, it goes up by another 1,300 crore. That's the power of that consistent compounding growth right there. Okay, on to Section 2, the big customer shift. But here's where it gets really interesting. This growth, it's not spread out evenly. The real story is buried in who their customers are, because there's a huge shift happening right under the surface. So to get what's going on, you gotta know who's buying all this power. For decades, this company's business has basically stood on two legs: domestic customers, people like you and me in our homes, and the big industrial customers. Think massive factories. Those two have always been the foundation of their business. And if we look at where things stand at the beginning of this forecast, back in 2026, you can see it plain as day. Domestic users are the biggest piece of the pie, right? Over half of all their sales. That's the classic business model we were just talking about. But now, let's fast forward to their 2030 projection. See that? The domestic slice shrinks a little bit, but look at the commercial sector. It's grown by 3 percentage points. Now, I know, 3% doesn't sound like a world-shattering number, but when you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar company, a 3% shift, trust me, that is a massive, massive deal. So it's not just about how big the pieces of the pie are. The real secret, the thing that explains that giant revenue number we started with, is all about the speed, the rate at which each of these customer groups is growing. And believe me, the difference is absolutely staggering. And boom, here it is. The commercial sector, it's forecast to grow by almost 11% every single year. That is more than double the growth rate of the domestic side. This right here, this is the rocket fuel powering their entire financial forecast. Which brings us to Section 3, how they predict the future. So how can they possibly be this confident, this precise? Well, that's where the data science comes in. What they're using is something called an exponential growth model. And honestly, that snowball analogy we used before, it's the perfect way to think about it. The snowball doesn't just grow, right? It accelerates as it rolls downhill, picking up more and more snow faster and faster. That kind of model is exactly what you need to predict the kind of explosive growth they're expecting from that commercial sector. But, and this is a really big but, there's a catch. This whole complicated model, all these precise numbers, everything balances on one single, absolutely crucial assumption, and it's a biggie. Here it is, right from their report. To make all the math work, they had to assume one single price for electricity, a flat rate of about 7.25 rupees per unit. Now think about what that means. For the purpose of this forecast, a giant factory is paying the exact same rate for its power as someone in a tiny apartment. Now, you and I both know that's just not how it works in the real world, right? So the question is, why would they make an assumption like that? And maybe more importantly, what does this tell us about what they're really planning to do?
And that brings us to our final section, Section 4, a strategy for growth. Because this is the most important part, isn't it? How do you take a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet and turn it into a real-world plan?
Well, that whole one price assumption simplifies the math, but it hides a really important part of the utility business. It's something called cross-subsidies. Basically, in the real world, big commercial and industrial customers pay more for their electricity. That extra money then helps keep the prices lower for the rest of us, for residential customers. So, when you understand that, the forecast points to a really clear three-step action plan. Step 1, they've got to redo the math, but this time using the real prices each customer group pays, just to see what the actual bottom line looks like. Step 2, they need to double down on that booming commercial sector, pour money and resources in to make sure they capture all that growth. And step 3, they absolutely cannot forget their industrial customers. They need to provide rock-solid, reliable service to them because that's their stable, foundational income. And that leaves us with the big, multi-billion-dollar question, doesn't it? The data is crystal clear. It's like a treasure map. An X marks the spot right on the commercial sector. But for a massive, slow-moving company like a utility, having the map and actually being able to pivot fast enough to get the treasure, well, those are two totally different things. The challenge from here on out isn't about the forecast anymore. It's all about execution.